Hi there, welcome to what's happening in Brazil. And we start by talking about the latest news from the country.
This week, President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva's government is carrying out a huge operation to expel over 20,000 illegal miners who invaded the Yanomami territory in the state of Roraima, northern Brazil. Before the effective swing into action, the government is already preventing illegal activities by blocking access and dismantling stations that supply the criminals with fuel and food. Last week, the airspace blockade over the Yanomami land was determined to intercept illegal miners' clandestine flights. Now the blockade ended, but flights keep being monitored. During the recent weekend, many illegal miners have started to run away from the region. The territory covered by the government operation is about 98,000 square kilometers, which corresponds to almost 14,000 soccer fields. More than 500 federal police officers and personnel from the armed forces, besides staff from environmental agencies such as IBAMA and FUNAI, participate in the action that will probably last for another 2 months. Brazil's Minister of Justice, Flávio Dino, informed that the government is monitoring the miners' escape and investigating the backers of the illegal mining activity in the region. In cases in which illicit activities are found, airplanes and equipment used to support mining will probably be interdicted. A news report released last weekend by the website Metrópolis presents a secret side of former First Lady Michelle Bolsonaro. Metrópolis heard employees at Planalto Palace and had access to WhatsApp text messages and audio recordings. While Michelle shows a serene and friendly image to the public, in the backstage there were serious cases of moral harassment against employees, intense arguments with Bolsonaro's sons, pantry theft, and even reports of her keeping a slush fund with resources from the presidency of the republic, in addition to the crime of illegal salary deduction known in Brazil as rachadinha. Senator Humberto Costa, from the Workers' Party, presented representations to the Public Prosecution Office and the federal police so that the crimes of misappropriation, corruption, and acts of administrative improbity committed by the former First Lady be investigated. In the last decade, Brazil has become a poorer and more unequal country. In 2021, the poverty rate reached the highest level since 2012. That's what shows a report released by the Institute of Applied Economic Research named A Country Going the Wrong Way: Poverty in Brazil in the Last Decade. The data shows that the annual poverty rate jumped from 12.9% in 2012 to 15.7% in 2021. The COVID-19 pandemic and the shortage of funds to social protection contributed significantly to the rise in inequality among Brazilians. Between the period analyzed, the increase in poverty was the highest recorded in more than 3 decades. Besides investigating poverty evolution in the country, experts defended income transfer policies to mitigate the situation. The social and economic advances achieved in the previous presidential mandates of Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and Dilma Rousseff between 2002 and 2015 were crucial in contributing to reduce social inequality in Brazil. One of the challenges the government faces now is to keep the social and economic programs without decreasing the resources to the most vulnerable population. Another demand is restructuring the programs that were dismantled during the government of Jair Bolsonaro, such as those focused on housing and food.
In recent weeks, we showed here in What's Happening in Brazil the humanitarian crisis in the Yanomami land. But that is not the only indigenous people suffering from the violence and neglected by the state. In Maranhão state, the Guajajara people is the constant target of killings and threats.
The federal government's omission in the last years and the dismantling of policies aimed to protect indigenous peoples caused a growing wave of violence against native peoples throughout the country. In Maranhão State, northeast of Brazil, individuals from the Guajajara indigenous people, one of the largest in the country, are asking for help. On January 9th this year, two young Guajajara men were shot while walking on a highway that crosses the Araribóia indigenous land located in Maranhão. On January 25th, indigenous man José Inácio Guajajara was killed, and 3 days later, Valdemar Guajajara was also killed.
Recently, two indigenous individuals were threatened with death here in the town of Arame. The situation is critical, so we are once again demanding justice, asking authorities to take measures as soon as possible. We need more safety.
The killing of Valdemar Guajajara happened on the day following the meeting of the Human Rights Commission of the Brazilian Bar Association in Maranhão State with the 47 indigenous leaders. In addition to violence, many other human rights violations have been reported.
The 47 indigenous leaders from 190 different indigenous communities were heard. They reported many human rights violations. Besides being denied the right to life, a consequence of security, they are also denied the right to food due to the lack of incentive for family farming. And especially, the right to education is being violated since the indigenous schools are totally abandoned. They have no air conditioner, fans, necessary materials, and adequate structure for teaching activities.
The protection of indigenous peoples is a right guaranteed by Brazil through the federal government. With the changes promoted by the new government, such as the creation of the Ministry of Native Peoples, there are expectations for coordinated work in Maranhão State to protect indigenous populations.
With regard specifically to protecting human rights defenders and indigenous territories, joint action with the federal government is fundamental. We hope that with the creation of the Ministry of Native Peoples and FUNAI's resumptions as a foundation aimed at safeguarding indigenous lives, we may advance in this institutional partnership.
In today's Cultural Talk, we will talk about the comics production in Brazil. Currently, this scenario has been occupied by artists out of the commercial circuit. They present their fights, lives, and ancestry in their works.
The first Brazilian comic story was published in 1869 by Ângelo Agostini and was called The Adventures of Nhoquim and Zé Caipora, the country's first hero. Over a century later, Brazil watches this universe being occupied by independent comic artists. In his research, illustrator and researcher Leonardo Rodrigues tries to understand how Black comic artists are reshaping history and taking leading roles in comics.
Para entender a questão do artista negro no quadrinho, eu volto para entender o que é o artista negro no Brasil.
To understand the matter of Black comic artists, I analyze what it means to be a Black artist in Brazil. Therefore, I take up the discussion about Black people as artists in Brazil. For many years, they were not seen as artists, but as service providers. I show how Black art and artists advanced at Great Coast and how comic art inherits these realities and difficulties Black people face in other areas.
Muito mesmo.
In 2022, the Zagaia Afro-Amazonian Comics Collective was launched in Pará. Conceived and organized by artist and researcher Elton Galdino, the publication was born of conversations between 10 artists from Black and indigenous roots.
Não basta só ter personagem negro ou ter
It is not enough to have a Black or Amazonian character. It is crucial to reflect on how these people are portrayed. So, from these conversation moments comes Zagaia, which we later distribute to libraries and public schools.
bibliotecas comunitárias.
The word Zagaia is the name of an African spear used by native peoples to hunt, fish, and battle.
Existe no Pará uma
There is
efervescência
a
cultural muito
cultural
grande,
effervescence in Pará state.
que essa
We
essa
need this
essa
production to
produção
spread out
expõe
of
para
the
fora do
state,
estado
among
por
other
alguns
reasons,
motivos, né?
for
Entre eles
us
a
to keep
gente
surviving.
In the city of Belo Horizonte, artist Lemos presents her experience as a child teacher in a public school in his book, Fessora.
Quadrinho autobiográfico e
This is an autobiographical comic book that depicts teachers' journey, affection, relationship with students, and working conditions. But it is not just an experience of mine, but of many teachers.
experiência de muitos professores, né?
It is interesting the collective sense that drives the comic book scene.
Eu acredito numa maior ampliação do quadrinho.
I believe Brazilian comics are going to expand in the next years, consolidate and acquire greater permeability. And I also hope for new ways, new possibilities, that more and more Black, indigenous, LGBTQ artists.
That's all for today. If you'd like to stay up to date with the latest news from the country, take a look in our social media accounts to contact us. See you next week!